thing, Raj, that I have noticed where people lack presence is because they are in their head rather than in the moment. Just go to your breath. Like right now, just notice the space between your exhale and your inhale. Now, notice I did two things. One is it brought me more present. You can even hear it in my voice. And
Yeah,
two, it
it
brought you
actually
more
is.
present.
Yeah, exactly. It had the same effect on me as you just described. How you come across to others is one of the most important factors in your success as a business leader. Many call this executive presence. The way you carry yourself impacts how your customers, your team members, even your vendors perceive you, which means your presence affects your ability to get things done. In this episode, we'll share ways to understand your executive presence and specific things you can do to actually be the leader you aspire to be, even if imposter syndrome is holding you back. So today's topic is diving deep into the presence that people always have. There's some people, Jeff, that walk into a room and you feel the energy, they're electric. You want to shake their hands because they're out there shaking hands, they've got eye contact. And then there's some that just don't command that level of presence. And as a leader, you really want to be on that side where people notice you, because that's going to have an impact on your ability to get things done, get customers, command a room. So let's talk about presence.
Right.
So welcome back to the podcast again, Dr. Jeff Kaplan, friend of mine, and an executive leadership coach.
Good to see you again, Raj.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. So how do you become aware of the kind of presence you have when you walk into a room?
Well, right. So that's a two-part. Right? So one is how do you become aware, right? And then how do you make it happen, right?
Yeah, yeah. And
So you
just to preface this, like it's not just when you walk into a room, it could be your presence when you're having a one-on-one meeting, a group meeting, giving a presentation, a meeting with your board. So, yeah.
Well, so, with a lot of folks doing Zoom or Teams, that's good news and bad news, right? Because we've lost a lot of that in-person stuff. But the good news is you can watch yourself. Now, the bad news is that it's created a weird thing where people are watching themselves all the time, which is adding a whole nother level, right? But just in terms of the awareness piece, three things I would say is one is make a recording of yourself and actually don't watch yourself, like minimize the camera so you're not looking at yourself, and then watch it, right? Two is ask somebody else to critique you, either because they're willing to watch it or they're just kind of taking notes throughout the meeting. And three is doing like a 360, because it's not just, I think about like it's your behaviors, right? How are you showing up, right? And then how are you speaking, right? And so a 360 assessment can help with all that.
I think the video recording part is really important. I know I used to do that myself. I remember giving a presentation to a live audience, and in the way back in the room, there's a little tripod looking right at me, and I would record myself. I asked everybody to be okay. I'm not going to like share the video with anybody. This was just for me to improve. And I looked at the recording and I was thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm slouching a little bit too much. My voice goes down too much. I'm not as animated. And I was like, wow, that's really eye-opening. And just to watch yourself and see the kind of presence that you actually have in such a group is powerful. It's really powerful.
Yes.
So,
would you like me to say how to actually develop it?
yeah. Well, like so you talk about two parts, right? So we talked
Yeah.
about the physical presence when you're actually in a room and just watching yourself there. Okay, that's fine and good. If you're giving a presentation, you can ask somebody. I mean, the other part is like when you're meeting one-on-one with somebody. I mean, you're not going to ask somebody, hey, do you mind if I record myself, to do the one-on-one? You may be able to do something with Zoom. In fact, I think there's
Correct.
something that a study I was reading where when people are on a Zoom call and you have the big group, most of the time you spend is actually watching yourself on the call as opposed to watching the other
That's
person.
correct. That's what I suggest you actually. Yeah, go ahead. So, what is your theory about it? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Um, I think it's natural, really. I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it's just natural, like how many times you just walk by a mirror and the first thing you do is just make sure your hair is
Correct.
okay in the mirror. It's a natural thing. So,
Correct.
yeah.
But here's what I'm going to say. First of all, my camera right now, it's cut out on me. I see you. I move my screen so I'm not looking at myself.
Okay.
Because one of the problems with being present is you're literally not present. You're
Ah,
wondering,
right.
what are people thinking about me? Oh, am I slouching too much or whatever? Like, you want to get that feedback, and then you want to practice, right? Like, whether it's the same presentation or whatever, again and again. But, practicing in real time should be targeted only for practice, not for actual dialogue.
Okay. So, real simple thing, minimize your screen while you're doing a Zoom call so you can actually focus on the other person. And that just itself in itself will command
Correct. Or hide it.
expectation.
Well, so if we're gonna go there, look, there's a lot of models about presence, right? To me, it's only two things. All right. So first is being overly prepared. And let's talk about that for a second. When you're not prepared, when I say prepared for the one-on-one conversation, prepared for the meeting, right? So not just that you've done your homework, but you've actually anticipated, you're thinking, who am I speaking to? Who's going to be in the room? You've anticipated their responses, the dialogue, the questions, and you're just not only prepared for that, but you're actually prepared. Like, you're so prepared. Have you ever been in a situation where, like, you're just so ready and you're kind of excited about being there? Well, when you're not ready, for example, somebody says something that you're not prepared to speak about, you're fumbling. Not only might you be fumbling through your papers or whatever, but you're in your head trying to think about what they said, and everyone else has moved on, right? And you're still back there trying to figure that out. But let me just say, the second thing is actually being fully present. Thing, Raj, that I have noticed where people lack presence is because they are in their head rather than in the moment. They're wondering, like, what to say. They're wondering if that was smart or stupid or what other people think, right? And it's distracting, right? So when you're in thought, you're not present. So anyway, so the more prepared you can get, the more you can just, be in your present. Let me say one other thing. If you struggle with that, just go to your breath. Like right now, just notice the space between your exhale and your inhale. Now, notice I did two things. One is it brought me more present. You can even hear it in my voice. And
Yeah,
two, it
it
brought you
actually
more
is.
present.
Yeah, exactly. It had the same effect on me as you just described. Yeah. And it's interesting because that caused me to pause and actually feel more
It,
relaxed.
it took you
Yeah.
to your body,
Yeah.
right? Which is a way to anchor into the present moment. It gets you out of thought. Thought is the distraction. Now, obviously, there has to be a wee bit of thought, but don't stay in thought.
Hmm. I think sometimes people get caught up in what have I got to say next when you're being interviewed, when you're talking to somebody, they're saying something. And instead of actually focusing on what they're saying, you're thinking about the next thing you're going to say,
That's exactly right.
right? And you end up missing some
Yeah,
key point or something, or even missing connecting a dot of something that you had prepared for and could have said had you not been so caught up thinking about what you're going to say.
correct. Well, on
Instead,
that, let me see. Yeah, so it's listen for deep understanding, not listen to speak.
mm-hmm.
And
That's a
on that
great
other
way to
note,
differentiate it.
right? On
Yeah.
that other note, I get a lot of leaders sometimes that have maybe some social anxiety or, that kind of thing. And, what happens is they think of saying something, but they hold back, right? And then somebody else says it and gets credit for it. And they're like, I wish I'd said that.
Yeah. Oh, don't you hate that? That's something. Um, so okay, so these are good techniques to just become aware of the way you can actually control how you come across a little bit. But sometimes there's just a I mean, even so, there might be a lack of awareness, like a lack of, to record yourself. How can you do this without recording yourself? So, for example, how you come across in a one-on-one meeting. I think that's really big because there's some people that don't realize that their word choice, that the presence that they have. And here's let me give you an example.
Okay.
If I am sitting in a one-on-one meeting and I am kind of like this, and I've got my arms crossed, I'm kind of kicking back in the chair. This is a defensive position. I'm not listening. I'm closed. Whereas if I've got my arms open, if I'm sitting forward, if I'm even leaning forward into the table or something, I'm much more intent. Those little nuances have a big impact on how you're coming across to that other person.
So your question was, how do you actually get the feedback, right?
Yeah.
So really simple, right? Here's the good news is who you are in one setting is the same person that you are in other settings, right? I mean, so how you habitually carry yourself is going to show up, right? So you have somebody that you trust. So for example, right, before we got onto this podcast, you just spontaneously offered me feedback in terms of how I've been showing up on podcasts, right? We have that trust, right? So if you find someone that you trust and someone to and say, listen, do me a favor, I would love if you could give me some feedback about how I show up. But you're going to have to give them very specific direction. So for example, 4 things that you might ask them to look at is, you mentioned word choice, 2, body language, which you just mentioned, 3, tone of voice, and 4, listening. Am I really listening to you? Right. And just ask a few people that you trust to give you honest feedback and tell them that your response is going to be, thank you very much, not get defensive.
That's really nice, Jeff. I love the 4 specific things and the fact that you're not just saying, can you give me feedback? Because people don't know what you're really looking for.
Exactly.
And honestly, they don't know how you're going to take it, right? And so if you give them 4 specific things and let's address each one of those, you're going to have a lot more to go on. That's excellent. Thanks for that.
You could even say, like, what might even be an easier step too is say, if you could just rate me on 1 to 5 on each one of these and then they rate you, because that feels easier to do, right? And then that takes them to the next step. So they gave me a 3 on word choice. So that's really helpful. Why wasn't it a 2, right? If 5 is the best, right? What did I not do, right? And then what would have made it, here's the key. This is it right here. What would have made it a 4?
Right, right. There's this line that I learned from Jack Canfield, the guy who wrote the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And he uses this one line about interpersonal relationships. And he will just say, Jeff, how and I, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you and I doing today? And it's just really simple. Are we at a 7? Are we at a 9? And then the follow-up is, what would it take to make that a 10?
Exactly.
And so you've got, and then to your point, you've got to have that trust, the ability to really accept the feedback. Sometimes feedback's hard to take, but being able to accept that, I think, is really important too. So
can I just respond? Can I just respond to that real quick? So I love that you just said, what would it make a 10? So 2 things. One is, it's a really good idea to have a vision, right, for what presence looks like for you, right? I often tell people, is there someone that you know in person, right, at work or something, or in the public eye, that you respect, that has presence, right, that you would like to emulate? Then I'd say, break it down. And what is it about them that has that presence that you like to emulate? Okay, so now you have the vision. But when you're asked, what I always say, when you're asking for then feedback, right, you want to go that one step. Like if somebody says you're a 2 on body language, I'm asking them what would make it a 3. Because if I say what would make it a 5 or a 10, if it's 1 to 10, that's way too far to reach. And then I fail and then I get frustrated and then I throw up the whole darn thing, right? So for feedback, in terms of what actions you can do differently, you're just looking to move the needle one small step.
Incremental improvements, I think, go a long way, because you might not be able to go to that 10 right away. It's going to take a while to get to that. At least you have something to aspire for, but you know what you can do to just kind of incrementally improve.
Not only will you not know, it'll be frustrating.
Yeah. When you give presentations and you've got to get up in front of an audience, and this could be giving a pitch to your board. It could be giving a presentation at a company conference. What do you do to overcome jitters so that you come across super, super confident? Look, I've given, and you've given, I can tell you, me from my personal experience, I've given a lot of talks and I still get nervous. And people are like, Raj, you don't look nervous at all. You look like you just kind of nailed it. I am nervous almost every single time before I get on stage.
I have a fun response to that. Well, first of all, I want to reiterate, be overly prepared, because if you're not, you should be nervous. 2, if you really, when I've worked with people who have extreme social anxiety, I actually tell them to have an exit plan, right? So like literally like, my stomach, they just need my stomach. I'm sorry, I need to run to the restroom or something. I'm just saying just to have that. But here's the 3. This is the big one. In fact, if you remember, for the audience, if you remember nothing else that I said today, this would be it. Don't make it about you. What's the higher purpose? So, for example, last year I did my first well, at least first in a while, keynote in person, right? And I was nervous, right? And what did I do to get me out of it? I had a few different little techniques, but one is right before I spoke, I reminded myself, this isn't about me. I'm a conduit to the message. And so I'm here serving the message. So connect to the higher purpose of what the presentation is about and honor and respect that higher purpose. Who gives a crap about you? You're just a grain of sand on a huge beach. Does that make sense?
It does. I can tell you when you're presenting to a board, almost, I mean, regardless of how much preparation you've got, and sometimes, unfortunately, you have to present news that they don't want to hear because maybe your numbers are off, that kind of stuff, and they will grill you. They will absolutely rake you
Yes.
over the coals. And so, they've got their purpose, right? They've got to make sure that their interest is shareholder value. And so,
Well, I would say the organization or its clients or patients or whoever the clients are, right? So I would say on that piece, even starting off with a 30-second story to the board that puts in context your presentation, because it is always about the clients, customers, and or mission of the organization. And it is not so, okay, yeah. So as you're speaking on behalf of this entity called the organization and its mission and its clients, customers, right? And just keep reminding yourself of that. It's so much more humbling to serve others than it is to try to look good, sound great, whatever. Like maybe you'll get a beating, but so what? It's not about you.
one of the things that I kind of hear is an underlying theme in some of the comments you've shared is that when you take your head out of the picture, you can
Yes.
actually relax long enough to be more authentic. You become much more authentic with that, and people, I think, gravitate toward
It's
authentic.
distraction. You're all these other So first of all, in this conversation, right? So you have a thought right now, and it's not just about what I'm talking about, right? So the mind, the monkey mind, right?
Yeah.
And so the mind is going on all the time. And the more you can tame those distractions, the more centered and focused and present you can be, the more powerful you will be, the more influence you will have.
And then you don't see as many obstacles in your way, and you actually can get the true message across. What are some of those little techniques? So you get in front of stage, you said that there's some techniques. I can share a couple of really simple ones, really basic ones that I use. One, I always make sure I use the bathroom before I get on stage.
That's good.
You just as a matter of practice. And always have a glass of water. I never know when I'm going to get parched. And I try not to eat nuts actually beforehand, because something always gets stuck and you're just talking. And next thing you know, you're not talking properly. I mean, basic stuff, but honestly, that's just table stakes at this point. But I think when you're new to presenting, you don't always know these things. And so I thought I'd share those. What are some of the techniques you
Yeah, so a few. So first, it starts with self-management, right? So did you get adequate sleep the night before? Did you hopefully refrain from drugs and alcohol, anything else that could be distracting? Did you eat appropriately, or did you just shove a bunch of carbs, 2 hours ago kind of thing, right? So making sure that you're doing sort of your basic, good habits. The second thing is I often say, like, either have a little picture or a phrase, right? So with Keynote, I had a phrase and a sticky that you have next to you that you can see, just to be an anchor to remind you again about the purpose, your higher purpose, why you're there, right? Or even something that's going to bring joy to you, maybe a picture of your family or something that's going to bring joy and not be distraction. I want to comment about the water, not just in terms of having the water, it's also be aware of the container that you put the water in, right? Because there could be some failed attempts there, which again you would identify if you were practicing. A one that I love is start, if it makes sense to, given the presentation, start with asking a question of the audience, right? Because there is something about getting their voice into the conversation early that also provides an anchor, stability, grounding for you as the presenter. Because otherwise you're talking to a bunch of faces and you kind of have zero ability other than your ability to read, faces while you're trying to figure out, what you're saying, to know where they're at. But by getting them involved, it's now a collaboration in a sense, and it just helps with grounding.
Another thing I do, not just ask questions, but sometimes I will start with a story. And the deeper the emotional connection I can make with the story and the audience, the more I have their attention. And in fact, there's one conference, it was a customer conference, and I was one of the executives in a company that helped to provide fundraising data so that nonprofits could generate lots of fundraising. And the emotional story that I shared was how one of our clients actually used the data to help get money to buy equipment to do hand surgery on children. And I mean, everybody had goosebumps by the end of the story. It also meant I absolutely commanded everybody's attention. And so what I said next was really important too. But being prepared with those stories, practicing, I mean, honestly, I can't tell you how many times I probably looked at the mirror, said the story repeatedly till I really felt comfortable with it. And then I was able to deliver it, that preparation.
Yeah, so people remember stories, right? They're here for action, remember stories, right?
Mhm.
And if you're presenting, you almost it's almost a crime to not have a story, right?
Yeah.
If you want them to remember. The other thing is remember to breathe, right? So get connected to your breath while you're up there. And have fun, right? Like, have some perspective and have fun. Like we're here for a short time. And you remember that, the audience doesn't care about it as much as you do, and and life will go on. So hopefully that you enjoy the topic, and if you don't, then maybe just do a quick check there, like, are you spending your time and energy in the wrong areas of discussion, right?
So there's one other topic I wanted to just touch on, and that's the use of cue cards when you're giving a presentation. I'm not a big fan of that because I feel like that itself is a distraction for the audience when you're looking down for a cue card. And there's this almost a case study where I believe it was Steve Jobs who was announcing one of the first iPhones, which I believe was only available on AT&T, and they had the CEO of AT&T on. And Jobs, of course, is riffing. He knows what he's going to say. He's talking absolute command of the audience. And the CEO for AT&T comes on, and he's talking, and he's looking at his cue card, and then he says something else. He looks at it, and you just lost it. You're like, oh my God, just did not command the same presence.
Well, right. And so it depends, right? If it's an hour, right? So it depends, right? So I recently did a wedding toast for a friend of mine that, I spent way more time on than one thinks that they probably should have to. And it was 6 minutes. I had a little thing in there as well, and I memorized it, right? And that makes sense. I was able to connect it with it. Sometimes if it's much longer, even having like the kind of the outline or something in front of you, even if you don't refer to it, it could be just helps with confidence. But what I would say is, regardless of whether you need it or not, in terms of cue card, not cue cards, I agree with you, but kind of your outline is definitely have memorized those first 2 minutes, right? Those first comments that you're going to make that's going to get them, because you need to engage them within 30 seconds. That's going to really engage them, right? And again, whether it's asking a question, whatever, knowing how to get out of this, because once you get going, you're in it, right? And usually the anxiety sort of subsides. It's that first couple of minutes that you really want to be very, very prepared for.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that some of these tips can help our audience be more present, whether you're doing a one-on-one meeting, group meeting, a presentation to your board, or a presentation to a large audience. So, Jeff, thank you very much for sharing those tips, and we will see you next time.